Don't forget that although you aren't telling a story, you must still do what stories do, which is lead the reader through an experience. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today I get to talk with you a little bit about my recent reading of the great Canadian artist, Sheila Heti. Starting with Pure Color, which came out a couple years back, and then moving to her most recent release, Alphabetical Diaries. Both of these are put out by Farrar, Straus and Giroux. To be 100% honest with you, I am recording this about a week after having finished Alphabetical Diaries. I typically record fairly soon after reading the books, maybe a couple of days later. But with Sheila Heti, she sort of shut me down a little bit. And it took me a bit to realize what it was that was going on. What it boils down to is that I am so overwhelmed by and grateful for what Heti has given me in her work, in just these two books alone, Pure Color and Alphabetical Diaries, that I'm defeated, meaning I can't properly give back to her what she has given me. I don't think any of us can. When I think of the time and effort and artistic vision that she has put into these books versus the time and effort that I have spent reading and thinking about these books, it really makes the whole institution of literary criticism and book reviewing seem foolish and absurd, ridiculous. So please just consider this the spoutings of a grateful reader. With each book that Sheila Heti writes, she reinvigorates her craft, rejuvenates her style, and reinvents her structuring even. You clearly see with each book that she does nothing short of completely pouring herself out into the book. Reading Pure Color and Alphabetical Diaries caused a constant, pleasurable ache in my soul. This stems from those moments when a writer is able to reach out and extend themselves enough beyond their limits to where they are able to put language around something that's completely inexplicable, completely ineffable in such a way to where on the surface it seems so foreign, yet underneath and in your heart, in your soul, in your sentiment, it touches at something so familiar that it's almost like you've been longing your whole life to have someone notice it and put words to it. She exhibits, in my opinion, an extreme amount of courage and vulnerability. And she's at the point where her courage has completely conquered her vulnerability. In the Reading the Room podcast on The Bar and the Bookcase, the host, Jalen, has a wonderful interview with Heti about Alphabetical Diaries. And there are two statements she made that really stood out to me. One is that she just very humbly and sincerely and genuinely isn't the type of writer who feels she has something to say, like something that needs saying. She just purely enjoys the activity of writing. And this was something that came up for me last year during the Why Do We Read Fiction series, because I realized that for me as a reader, just reading purely as an activity is something I so love. There's no real teleology behind it. And unlike modernism, where it's on the reader to figure out the rules of the game in a given book, she likes to share the rules with the reader up front so that writer and reader can play the game together. And then one other thing that she says that stood out to me. She says, I don't know how to define perfection, but I know how to get there for me. And that is clear in a book like Pure Color, which I'll just cut to the chase. Pure Color has now become a patch sewn in to the quilt of my reading life. And I hope that Sheila Heti will possibly watch at least what I'm about to say or hear about it from somebody. I remember back in 2022 when this book was about to come out, Michael Silverblatt read an advance copy, and when he was done, he called me. I'll never forget it. I was at the gas station pumping gas, and he called me. I answered, and he said, I have just read a book that I think might be a masterpiece. And he said, it's called Pure Color by Sheila Heti. Unfortunately, he never got to have the inevitable interview with Heti on Bookworm, but I hope that I can relay that it certainly caught his attention and had his stamp of approval. The way I feel about it is very much akin to the way I feel about Adam Levine's Bubblegum, which for those of you who watch the channel a lot, you know that I have an amazing amount of respect and passion for that book as a work of fiction, as an exemplary work of fiction. I have also expressed the fact that I think that the majority of readers will not be able to appreciate that book because we haven't learned how to take the time and make the space for such books. And even though Bubblegum is somewhere around, 700 pages, I think it equally applies to Pure Color at 200 pages. From what I've seen, there are a lot of people out there, a lot of people who were already fans of Heti's work, who really connected with Pure Color. But there were just as many that I grazed across who were completely bewildered, completely baffled. And it's just one of those books where I finished it and I saw on Goodreads that it's rated something like a 3.5. Once again, I'm just disgusted with the star system, the 5-point scale system, as it just seems profoundly disrespectful to artists and their work, but also just so saddened that our culture has evolved to a place where a lot of us don't get the privilege of being taught how to appreciate such books, how to read such books, how to experience such books. Pure Color is about a girl named Mira who goes to this select school, this elite school for a select group of people who want to be art critics. And then she experiences the end of that dream. She goes through the ceremony of innocence. And really what she discovers is that the world has completely shifted, that the whole profession of the professional art critic has been drowned out by the endless streams of people like me, honestly. Meaning the majority of people are not looking to the trained professional critics, but they're tuning in to Instagram and TikTok and YouTube and so on to get, or Goodreads, to see what the democratic scale has to say. And so there's this huge paradigm shift where the glory and romantic dream of this life of a critic, which has been so dear to her, more dear to her than anything else. She says frequently as she continues through her evolution of self-discovery and honestly transmogrification in this book, which is so beautiful, as she realizes that books, art, they've been more important to her than even her own family, her own father, even though she really only has him and he her. And so that's the basic plot. Girl has huge hopes and dreams. They're completely dashed. She's disillusioned and left to pick up the pieces and reconstruct what her life and world can be. But the way that this book is structured is it's broken into fragments on either side of a very concentrated and dense middle or peak. It's almost like a pyramid where it starts out fragmented and increasingly gets a little more dense, a little thicker, and that culminates in a point, and then it slopes back off and becomes fragmented. But in that concentrated middle, she is also transmogrified in this, oh my goodness, this stunning feat of poetic imagination that allows her and her father to observe the world, observe life, and discuss the large topics. Because Mira is so obsessed with books and art, what we also get in Pure Color is an absolutely thorough investigation of the famous aphorism of Hippocrates, vita brevis ars longa, or life is short but art is long. Is that true? And who is it that keeps art long? This is also Heti's cosmogony and theogony. In this cosmogony and theogony, we are all living in between the first and second drafts of creation, while God the artist has stepped back from the canvas to observe his first draft. She adopts a biblical cadence in her prose to deliver this story that feels like a sacred incantation all the way through. Not just because of the mythological opening that sets the tone and typifies and categorizes existence, but also in devices like the repeated use of "in the beginning." There's a real hunger that's palpable in these pages for spirituality, for faith, for something beyond the materialist creed, a need for traditions and faith in those traditions. Through grief and loss and failure and unmet expectations, confusion, disaster, chaos, alienation, isolation, loneliness, and suffering, through all the trials and travails of life, in so horrible a world, what emerges ultimately, though, in Pure Color is a love letter to the only world that you and I know and will ever know. We find again and again that there is beauty in suffering and imperfection. That though the initial impulse of the young artist or the young critic is toward perfection, it is, in this draft of existence anyway, the very falling short of that yields the beauty of life. But just as those future people in the second draft of existence, after we're all gone, can never return to this draft, so we can never recapture the world we lived in with our first loves. So it will be for God in the next draft, when he will dream darkly about our world. He will not actually wish he could be here with us, but he will sense that the past had some extra vitality, which the present does not. Perhaps it won't be so bad when we all die at once the beginning of the second draft comes. Perhaps it won't be so upsetting that we are made to die one at a time here in the first draft of existence. That is the pain and the longing. That is the beautiful. Like I said, there's so much about art in this book, and I love how Heti captures the transition, the development of Mira's thoughts on art and on what is beautiful, what art is for, as she goes through her life. Art is supposed to give us the opposite feeling, that human endeavor has wings. A painting should make a person take flight spiritually. What do humans go to art for but to locate within themselves that inward turning eye, which breathes significance into all of existence? For what is art but the act of infusing matter with the breath of God. But then it starts to transition from that early youthful vigor to a more mature and initially foreign understanding of art, and especially the role of the critic and art historians and so on. Art is not made for living bodies. It is made for the cold, eternal soul. And her whole notion in here about this realization of what kind of disposition, what kind of person it takes to usher in art, appreciation, artists, famous works, keep them alive from one generation to another is very interesting and will remind you of certain critics that do come off as cold. A difficult life on the knife edge of feelings, since that's what being an art critic meant. An existence hard up against the sharp knife edge of life. Color is not just a representation of the world, but of the feelings in a room, and the meaningfulness of a room in time. A writer could suspend their soul in language, making the souls of writers like droplets of oil, suspended in the sea of life. You couldn't see the water, but you could see the drops, clear little circles, buoyant and complete. To be in a world in which the writers she loved had once lived and written beautifully, that meant there was something real to find here. Art had mattered to her most of all. And then she goes on and it says, because art had meant more to her than any human being, it meant more to her than her father did. Her love for her father was great, but her love for books was greater. And it just reminds me of those artists like Rilke, who pretty much forsook his wife and daughter for his art. And then we jump way ahead after much transpires and Mira changes. You are sad because art, which is love, will be gone. But you only need art because you are stuck in the first draft. And so what it's expressing is that when Mira thinks about no longer living, what she's really sad about is that there won't be art. And it is through art that she has experienced love. And this conflation of art and love is very interesting in terms of art being not a synecdoche of love, although that works, but more of a gateway to the eternal. And finally, towards the end, Mira knew that humans made art because we were made in God's image, which doesn't mean we look like God. It means we like doing the same thing God likes. Both making life and making art are pouring spirit into form. That's beautiful. An artist is driven to make art by the spirit inside them, making an artwork like a signal or flare calling out, beckoning its kin to come near. This is why an artist never tires of their task. And so this could also be not only a Bildungsroman, or the story of the coming of age of its character, but also a Künstlerroman, the coming of age of an artist, because we also get a lot of insight into what you can see as Heti herself grappling with her pursuit of writing. And I think what I so appreciate is the spirituality of the book and the earnest, honest, passionate crying out for an understanding of how to pursue and achieve a spiritual dimension to one's life. Our relation to others is not what we think. It is our relation to spirit that makes us alive. There's a whole section in almost the dead center of the book. And like I said, this is the apex or the apogee of that density of the book. And in this moment, she has been transmogrified in such a way to where she is transcendently beside her father and they're hashing out the large questions. And I don't know what to do to properly express what a beautiful sequence this is throughout the middle of the book. But in this one section, which I suppose I'll just read in its entirety, it's just one unbroken paragraph without any quotations to signify that people are talking or who's talking or when it has switched from one to the other. Because in this very imaginative sequence, the father and daughter are side by side, really beyond our human existence, and they're having a dialogue. And so the form, as it's laid out on the page, really mirrors the sensation of what's going on. And as you can tell, I'm trying not to give anything away. But it kicks off with Mira talking. You can philosophize about God all you like. That doesn't make him real. I know. All I'm trying to say is that if you want to have a true picture of God in your head, you have to recognize that you can have no true picture of him. Well, of course not. Of course you can't have a true picture of something that doesn't exist. But if you believed that God existed, then you can believe anything you want, because if you believe in God, God is something that can do or be anything it wants to be. So it can be a million things. It can be different for everybody. That doesn't make it not real. That might make it even more real, like a fingerprint is different on every human body, or the way our muscles work has a unique signature too. So does that make a fingerprint or the way our muscles work something that's not real? Look, it's against the laws of nature. They say God put the whole universe into motion, but how can he do that without a physical being? Because it's a basic thing. For something to act, it has to have a physical being. But cells act, and you can't see cells. And atoms act, and you can't see atoms. Yes, you can. You can see them through a microscope. But without a microscope, we couldn't see them. I know, so what? So all I'm saying is that maybe we don't have the technology yet to see God. No. Well, we once didn't have the technology to see cells or atoms, but human beings had an inkling, even before we could see them, that such things were there, that small things made up big things, but they couldn't prove it, and humans have always had an inkling of God, too. You must admit we don't understand completely how the universe works. I agree, we don't know what dark energy is, and we don't know what dark matter is, and it makes up 80% of the universe. Right, we're discovering things all the time. I know, but those are details. 80% of the universe is not a detail. I know, but they'll eventually figure it out, and when they do figure it out, it'll make sense because things make sense. But what I'm saying is that maybe it's not even that there are things we don't know, but that our minds are not good enough that we ever can know. Come on. Or because maybe if there is a God, we're conceiving of him wrong, and that's why we can't find him. Are you serious or just being provocative? No, I'm not being provocative. You're being serious. I don't know. I'm not 1,000% sure like you are, because I don't think that the scientific method is the only way to prove that something is real. No? What do you think is the way to prove something is real? Imagination. Honestly, I just feel so silly trying to convey a sense of how beautiful this book is. I'll leave you with one passage, one excerpt taken completely out of context. And just suffice it to say that this is one of my new favorite books. And it has sort of defeated me in my efforts to articulate and convey what I think about it. And I don't really feel bad about that, in a way that makes this book and my reception of it so personal and so intimate. I can only hope that you connect with it the way that I have. But here's the last decontextualized excerpt I'll leave you with, and I'll stop talking about pure color. There are so many things you can do with your body if you can let it relax and bend to the shape of the universe, which is spherical tubes that are spherical not only in one direction, such as along it, but within it at every juncture, so that you can bend your back over the sphere of Saturn's rings, not only sideways across the ring, but within the ring itself, which is spherical all the way through. Okay, and her latest publication is Alphabetical Diaries, again by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. And this one is wild and kind of reminded me of Alexander Theroux's recent publication with Tough Poets Press, Truisms, where he took his thoughts, journals, diaries, whatever, for who knows how long, and then put them into rhyming patterned quatrains and sort of delivered it as his spiritual biography or spiritual journal. In sort of the same way, with an Oulipo type arrangement, Sheila Heti took something like a decade's worth of diaries that she had on a computer, and she broke them all into sentences on rows in a spreadsheet, and then she sorted them alphabetically. And she ended up with something like 500,000 words, and over the course of 14 years, edited it down, mostly just cuts, just cutting things out, preserving the alphabetization, and then just making cuts to get it down to the 60,000 words that we have in this 200-page book. And the way that it's put together in the book is the chapters become the alphabetical letters. So we get the A section, the B section, C, all the way through to Z. I think there's no X. And so with this one, it was a little different in that she was not coming up with something. She was taking something that was already there. And then all of the work was in figuring out what to take out. And then leaving it all in one big chunk per section. So it's just one big unbroken paragraph with all of these sentences. And they're fairly short. It gives it a sort of rhythm nonetheless, and a cadence that, because so many of the sentences in each clump start with the same word or same words because it was alphabetized, it kind of gives it that feel of the fact that from Lucy Elmon's Ducks Newburyport. I will say that for the average reader who's not familiar with Sheila Heti, unless you are an aspiring author or an aspiring artist or someone who just appreciates experimental stuff, likes diary entries, or if you're just some sort of voyeur, unless those are true, then I wouldn't recommend this as a starting place for Sheila Heti. But for those of you who already are enamored of her work, then absolutely. For anyone who is an aspiring writer, like I said, this gives you a great glimpse into the life of a writer with all of its doubts and circumstances. We get a rare glimpse of the human, all too human life of the person behind such sublime work as Pure Color. And by the end of it, it made me appreciate and think even more highly of Sheila Heti. I remember when I was an aspiring fiction writer, I remember coming across some advice that said, you're going to have to go to the edge of what you're comfortable with and then push beyond it. And that was sort of the death knell for me. Well, in my opinion, Heti has done just that. She's fearless in her vulnerability, which again, I think has been conquered by her courage. So we can't even really speak of vulnerability anymore. But she's so fearless and ruthless in her pursuit of artistic truth and going beyond her limits as a writer, that as I read through these entries, I think to myself, yes, this person was born to be a writer, deserves her place as one of the great writers of our current day. I can be completely fine with laying my pen down on the table and walking away, because people like Sheila Heti, they are putting stuff out there that really matters. Reading this book and then going out into the world and living my life, I noticed that the book was changing the way I was thinking and talking. And I was thinking and talking in her voice and in her style. And this to me is always a good signal of a writer doing something great, because David Foster Wallace has had the same effect on me. When you feel your thought patterns and your speech changed and shaped by what you're reading, that's a powerful thing. It's got this incantatory infectiousness, because again, most of the sentences are fairly short, and because they're alphabetized in clumps, they start with the same word or few words. And so it's got this rapid fire feel to it. Also, doing the book this way, alphabetizing and then cutting it down so much, and the data, let's say, that she started with, covering such a large space and time. Well, then you go and alphabetize everything. Now it's all over the place. It's all mixed up. Time and space are completely chaotic and wrapped up and all over every direction. And she said that the reason that she did this is because she was wanting to read back over all of these diaries to get a sense of everything that had gone on. But she didn't want to actually sit down and read through all the entries, because this would be very tiresome. So she just wanted to get a sense of everything. And so she thought to herself, oh, I'll just bring them all into this document and sort them, break them into sentences and then sort them. And I'll just go through, and that'll give me the sense of what the last 10 years or whatever has been like. And wow, it's just so neat how memory works too, because as we're reading this, we note anachronisms, and it almost reads like a story that unfolds in all these different directions. And you can tell when something is connected to something way back that you already read. And so sometimes it can have such a great effect when you're seeing sort of the end of something and then you recognize the beginning of it later. And also doing the book that way just so radically compresses time and space that we get to experience the long vicissitudes of life suddenly side by side. Some of the sentences stand on their own as just quick little aphorisms. A budget will help you know where to go. Even if it turns out you misplaced your faith, have faith. I am happy because there is nothing I want. I have started playing Tetris, which feels halfway between writing and drinking. And so some of them are pretty funny. Like another one on the facing page says, I hated my brain tonight. I was always watching myself to see what kind of effect I was creating, to create the effect I most wanted to create. It is a great failure to age. Agree. Maybe my 20s were about writing and finding a man, and my 30s will be about being with him and learning how to write. Maybe nobody's life is any different from that. My mind was racing with all these thoughts, and I asked myself if these thoughts were good, and my mind said no. Perhaps always planning to break up is a way of gaining control over the feeling of not having control over the path of love. Some of these are longer composites that work well together, and you'll notice that there are frequently these runs or riffs of sentences that really work together well to create this effect. And it couldn't have been intended, is the best part about it. Or she was able to edit down and shape them in such a way to where she thought, oh, these go together really well. Because again, in that Reading the Room podcast, she talks about how there is this effect caused by getting the right two sentences together that's like striking a match against the strip on the back of the matchbox. I would like to be not at all biological, but that would be too dry a life. I would like to know life's laws. I would like to open up the universe, particularly the human universe and the human heart. I would like to think about consciousness and God these next few years. I would love to become a theoretical physicist. I would love to know some concrete things about the world. I would often rather lie in bed and think and feel than read. I wrote an email to Rosa this morning and received a beautiful letter from Lemons. It would be nice to get better at writing. It would be nice to make a little book of all the injunctions you have towards yourself. It wouldn't help me at all. It's 2:34 every time I check the time these days. It's 4 p.m. It's 4:41 now. It's a fantasy of being saved. It's a stupid idea. It's a yellow, cloudy sky. It's amazing to me how life keeps going. It's better to work, to go into the underground cave where there are books, than to fritter away time online. It's crazy that I need all of these mental crutches in order to live. It's fiction. It's fine. Just because there are difficulties, that doesn't mean you have done anything wrong. Just because these things are hard, that doesn't mean you made the wrong decision. Just deprive that part of your brain. Deprive it of oxygen and let it die. Just don't think about it. Just kidding. There are little entries in here that very well apply to this book itself. None of this is very interesting to read, I'm afraid, and I know it won't be interesting for me to read later. It's kind of funny that it ended up not only that she said that at some point and it became this book that now I've read. Maybe this will finally be the book without characters. Use whatever techniques you want and remember what you first knew, that it doesn't matter what the book is about. One thing that I think I'm thankful for above everything else is that she deliberately left in just about everything that was about writing and books, reading. And so the majority of what I took note of and tabbed has to do with that. And that kicks off right at the very beginning of the book in the, of course, A section, which the opening is so captivating for someone like me who's interested in the interior lives of writers and in their daily pursuit of that craft. A book about how difficult it is to change, why we don't want to, and what's going on in our brain. A book can be about more than one thing, like a kaleidoscope. It can have many things that coalesce into one thing, different strands of a story, the attempt to do several, many, more than one thing at a time, since a book is kept together by its binding. A book like a shopping mart, all the selections. A book that does only one thing at a time. A book that even the hardest of men would read. A book that is a game. How great is it that the whole thing kicks off with a book, A-B. A writer is just one person under the stars, one person in a universe, writing about the whole entire universe. Art is not essential, but love is essential. And maybe that's why people make art, to express their love of something. That tree, humans, the world, language, intensity of thought. And the person who doesn't respond to a work of art is perhaps missing the love of the thing which the artist is pointing to lovingly. Fiction and nonfiction together, because the imagination is more amazing than anything in life. And life is more amazing than anything you can make up. I really, really hope that despite my sort of flailing here as a reader rendered radically redundant and restive, I hope that at least something has gotten through and reached you. If you haven't discovered Sheila Heti yet, if you have and you haven't read Pure Color, if you're curious about her latest Alphabetical Diaries, I hope something in all of this word salad maybe caught your attention. Sheila Heti, in her books, she is inventive, imaginative, passionate, sensitive, courageous, often very funny. And again, for me, the standout right now is Pure Color. This book has sort of stepped in and taken a place of much prominence in my life. I guess the best way to articulate the way that I feel trying to sit here and express what it's like reading Sheila Heti and what I've gotten from it so far is to read one of her sentences from Alphabetical Diaries. This is some kind of quiet crisis carrying itself out inside me that I am not even fully participating in.